afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host Imperial Dane. Topic of the day: Panzerkampfwagen 5 Panzer. Available at the Heavy Panzer Corps 490 manpower, 170 fuel. It is the heaviest non-doctrinal Panzer the Germans have, with more armor and health than a Panzer IV. In fact, almost as much armor as a Tiger tank. It can generally bounce off most shots from the front, and of course that is also one of the initial rules you have to remember about the Panther, and in fact also one which was impressed upon Panther commanders and such during the war. Always present the front of the armor to your opponent, because your rear is much weaker, and generally you also want to keep a slightly healthy distance between you and your opponent. You want to avoid getting flanked. If you get flanked with your Panther, you're going to be in a lot of trouble very quickly, and particularly getting swarmed. Though of course with the Panther's speed and its range, that's not too hard. The Panther has the same range, for example, as the Stug, and it's also one of the fastest tanks in the game. Only the T-34-76 actually outdoing it in terms of speed. So if you know what you're doing, you can generally get a lot out of your Panther. It's not so strong against infantry though, due to three which having more focus versus tanks. That's not so completely useless versus infantry. In particular, once upgraded with the Panzer machine gun, it can do alright versus infantry. Its main gun can do sort of alright machine guns as well. Of course, you have to be careful around anti-tank guns, so they still have a reasonable chance of penetrating the frontal armor. But overall, your Panther should in general bounce most medium tank shots, for example, and actually be a bit of a issue in that department. Even field guns and anti-tank guns will slightly have trouble at range with the Panther's main gun. Even the S-35 might have a slight headache there. At Veterans 1 you get Blitzkrieg, though currently I wouldn't say it's that great. On the other hand, once you hit Veteran 2 with the Panther, you get armoured skirts up, which generally makes it one of the heavier armoured tanks. In fact, it will then have more armour than a Tiger, and in the actual war, actually the 80mm sloped armour was actually better than the 100mm non-sloped for the larger parts. There's some slight bits, something called dual matching, but that's another story. And eventually the fleet, it becomes a lot more mobile and also gains a higher rate of fire. Of course, it's also harder for the Panther to reach that, but still keep in mind it is overall a pretty nifty tank, though again not so strong versus infantry as say the Panzer IV or the Stug, but still under the right conditions it can actually still be a threat to them. It's not completely useless, it's not say like an elephant, and again with a Panzer machine gun it becomes a reasonable threat. But in general, when it comes to engagement, you know, you can usually just sort of engage it from the front, fight it out that way. For example, versus most medium tanks, the T-34, the Sherman, you'll generally have the advantage due to high penetration, or the noticeably high penetration of the Panther, plus the higher frontal armor pretty much also means for a larger part they'll struggle. Of course, you might want to have something to spot for it so it can sort of fully take advantage of the 50 range, because even then, against most medium armor, it will still pretty much penetrate every single time. It is essentially something that dominates in any medium armor engagement. Versus heavier tanks, it might struggle depending on things. For example, a sheer slag-out match with an IS-2, it might have a bit of trouble on there, and if you then sort of maneuver properly versus the IS-2 at step range, you can usually have a chance of winning there, for example. So that is something to keep in mind. Though of course also to keep in mind, of course also for your opponents, it's actually costs quite a bit of resources to take out to it. I mean, it's about 600 manpower at the very least, plus an awful lot of fuel. Plus, of course, the building there, and then the Panther itself. So that's a lot of fuel requirements for the Panther, and it's usually something you sort of want to prepare for and sort of build up fuel towards. I mean, a fuel cache, for example, is not an entirely bad idea. It's done. Say something to keep in mind as well. But using the max range of the Panther and its frontal armor, you can usually get dominate versus medium armor. Versus infantry, you'll usually not be half bad off either, though if you really want to punish infantry, you're usually better off getting a Panzer IV, or say a Stug, or a Panzer IV. So that's another Propagandacast Lehr entirely in that case. Versus heavy armor, you usually want to flank, or in the case of the IS-2, unless it's Veteran 2, you know, engage at range, though that might still have a few issues there. And of course, as always, turn the front towards the enemy, try as much as possible to avoid the rear being exposed, because that is really one of the Panther's main weak points. And of course, mines can also be an issue, because then it loses its speed advantage, in which case it also becomes much easier to outmaneuver, and then the rear point becomes a weak spot again. So those are some vital things to remember. And again, infantry can be a bit of a weak spot, though. Mind you, if you are going to try and disable it using infantry, don't attack from the front. Again, with the 3 machine guns it has, hull mounted, coaxial, and the pinto mounted, it will cause quite a bit of harm to your infantry if you try to attack from head on. So it's also vital to keep in mind when dealing with a Panther. Otherwise you are going to find yourself in a bit of a sticky mess. And the Panther won't, which is quite opposite of what you want to do. So try and keep that in mind as well. Do that and you'll generally get a lot out of your Panther. And generally you'll cause your opponent much grief with your Panther, which is generally what you want to do. And not the other way around. So again, be mindful of the rear. If that is exposed, it can very quickly go down in health. Very quickly indeed. And in particular now, pack forts being secured by opponent can be a threat. And they're of course trying to turn. But again, re-exposed armor and medium armor, the armor all of a sudden had an issue, well, a bit of an issue. So keep that in mind when utilizing your Panther. And again, keeping all those things in mind with your Panther will get you the most out of it. It'll cause it to be a terror for your opponent. In particular, if you want to get it to victory 2, and that should initially be a part of your goal. Get it to victory 2. Have a few minor armor engagements with your opponent. Pull back, repair, engage again if you can't destroy, and just keep slowly building up, because once it reaches victory 2, it will be really difficult for your opponent to deal with. And otherwise, get the pinto mount machine gun up so it's reasonably effective versus infantry as well. And again, consider what target you're engaging, and then use the different advantages of the Panther. Medium armor, frontal armor, always. Of course, frontal armor versus everything, but still frontal armor, main gun. Versus heavier, speed and range. The medium armor largely then will have less of an effect versus tank, so of course you want to also flank using the speed and the range and other fun things. Otherwise, build supports veterancy. Try to be a bit careful around infantry. And so on, you'll get the most out of their Panther. Of course, with the opponent, it'll about mines, it'll about maybe somehow disabling it, getting behind it, and knocking it out, outflanking it. Like, for example, right here, where the player snuck up around here and then attacked from the rear, sort of making things a lot more difficult while I had a Pack 40, but that could also be a veterancy field gun firing away from another side. I mean, that way you can also cause a bit, because an opponent who does get a Panther will not have a lot of other armor, for example, because again, it is a very expensive investment, so that's also something to keep in mind. Do I have a reason to get a Panther? Because if you don't, you can actually end up being a bit in the arse, and of course in some cases you might want to consider getting Panzer Force, assault guns, or something else, but again, if you do go for a Panther, be sure you need it. I mean, it's not like, say, an elephant where, it's going to be a complete waste if your opponent only goes infantry, but it might not perform quite as strongly. And then again, there's also the Sturm Panzer Force, so keep that in mind. Hopefully this is enlightening you as to the Panzerkampfwagen 5, as there were some people who requested it, and of course, other requests for Propagandacast Lehr always welcome. Write them in the comments, and I'll see what I can do to sort of fulfill them, though I can't guarantee it will happen now, or I might even forget them, in which case, very much my pardons. But anyways, if you did enjoy it, subscribe, share it with everyone. If not, make a request and I'll see what I can do. Also, feel free to donate to the Propagandacast. Every dollar is appreciated and certainly helps me keep the propaganda flowing. Links to that are in the description, along with links to my Facebook and my Twitter. This is Imperial Dane, wishing you all a grand day.